In the previous episode, we had a lot of problems. Yeah, a lot of them. And I'm not absolutely sure, but I think everything can be traced back to the day I did donuts in the parking lot. Well, it was fun, but now I'm paying for it. So the very last thing that happened to this car was we took it out for a quick test drive, and mind you, the CVT drive belt was brand new. Anyway, after less than 10 miles, the brand new belt completely disintegrated and got jammed into the driven pulley, and of course that locked up the drive system and literally brought the car to a screeching halt. So I had some theories and I set about to repair the drive system. Long story short, off camera, we got the car back on the road and in fact completely solved the issue with the drive belt becoming damaged after a short drive. But now we had a new problem, and that was the CVT clutch was slipping and chattering. Now there's a certain amount of slip during acceleration, and that's normal, but generally once the car is up to speed, the CVT drive doesn't slip at all. And the reason I can say that is, the components on this CVT drive system normally do not get hot at all, and will stay cool to the touch even after a 30-mile drive. However, after the most recent repair, everything was getting insanely hot. Now, keep in mind, this clutch system is not rated for the power we're putting through it, but it's been more or less reliable for the past few months now, and this sudden change in reliability was perplexing. So the slipping CVT drive is one thing, but the drive was also chattering or bucking, and that's bad. Here's an example of the car chattering a few months ago, and as you can see, when the car starts accelerating, we get a violent engagement of the clutch. Anyway, when we had this issue a few months ago, we were able to resolve it by adding a support bearing to the input shaft, but now the chattering clutch is back. Now, I'm not one to give up easily, and since we had excellent results with this drive system before, well, I spent many days trying to get it to work again. We basically tried everything to get this system to work. We tried shimming the engine up with this big shim, then we tried a slightly thinner shim, then we tried no shim, then we tried a different driven pulley, which by the way, this one broke right away. We tried the American-made belt, we tried the Italian-made belt, we even tried the original driven pulley that's been modified with this washer to limit the travel, and of course we tried different combinations of each setup. Now every time we work on the CVT drive system, the engine has to come out. So this is very time consuming. At this point, it's really hard to say what's broken, but the problem is either in the drive clutch or the driven pulley, or both. Now, at some point during the troubleshooting, I realized that the drive system may be getting hot because we removed the titanium wrap on the exhaust system. So even though I hate this stuff, I went ahead and reinstalled the wrap. Now, as expected, the wrap made a huge difference in the engine bay temps, but it didn't help the clutch issues. Now, since we don't know what part is bad, well, it's time to replace everything. The problem is, this Comet 40 series CVT clutch is only rated for 18 horsepower, and it's probably a matter of time before all the new parts start failing. So, the decision was made to upgrade the CVT clutch to the Comet 90 series. So, this is a Comet 94 Duster clutch and a Comet 90 driven pulley. And as you can see, these parts are significantly larger, which is good. The belt for this CVT drive is also much thicker and should last a long time. Now, even though these CVT components are stronger, I think as a precaution, we'll no longer do donuts in the parking lot. But overall, I think this significantly larger clutch system should do the trick. Now here's the best part. This new Comet 90 series clutch has a beginning ratio of 3.49 to 1 and will automatically shift to 0.78 to 1. Now let's compare that to the older Comet 40 series CVT that we were using. So on the 40 series, we have a beginning ratio of 2.43 to 1, and of course as the car accelerates, the ratio automatically changes to 1 to 1. As you can see, the 3.49 ratio on the new clutch will give us a nice boost in torque from a standing start. And as the car accelerates, the ratio will shift to 0.78 to 1, which means we'll have a bit of an overdrive. Or in other words, this new CVT clutch will have a wider range and the car will accelerate a lot faster. And that makes me happy because making this car accelerate faster is exactly what I want. So that's the good news. The bad news is, well, this Comet 90 series CVT clutch will absolutely not fit in the custom engine cradle that we built for the Renault. And building a completely new cradle is totally out of the question. So, I guess this video is over. Wait a minute, what about modifying the current engine cradle to accommodate the new CVT clutch? I guess we could do that, but it ain't gonna be easy. Let's see, first we'll need to widen the cradle without changing any of the mounting points, and that's gonna be awkward. Next we'll have to widen the support braces, and these support braces are very important and cannot flex at all. Again, that's going to be difficult. So the input shaft to the transmission will also have to be a lot longer, and that means we have to fabricate a new shaft and completely disassemble the entire rotating assembly. That's not going to be easy because everything is glued together with Loctite. Of course, we'll also have to move the input shaft support bearing a few inches back. Not a big deal. Next, due to the different belt length, well, the closest size belt I could find requires that the engine be moved up about an inch. And that ain't too hard, but that means the exhaust will have to be lengthened to clear the cross member. So we'll have to modify the exhaust system too. So as you can see, we're just better off ending the video now. But since you folks showed up for some entertainment, let's just make this happen. Okay, well, let's get started by widening the cradle. Now, I did read in the comment section that some folks were saying that I had the driven pulley installed backwards. Well, I guess that depends on what type of clutch system you're used to working on. In the case of the Comet 40 and the 90 series CVT systems, we in fact have the driven pulley installed in the correct direction. Now there's actually room for this CVT to operate as far as acceleration goes. However, on deacceleration, the slack in the drive belt can cause the belt to contact the sides of the cradle for a few moments. You do that enough times and the belt is history. So in order to minimize the belt damage, we're going to provide more than enough clearance for the belt as the CVT transitions throughout its range. And that means we need to cut away some metal here and of course here. Now remember, we're modifying this cradle without changing any of the mounting points, so the material that we cut off will certainly weaken the cradle, and we need to add reinforcements in order to keep stuff from flexing. Anyway, this cradle is made from 3/16 thick angle iron, and we have plenty of extra angle iron, so after we cut away some of the material, we'll reinforce the cradle by welding angle iron onto the opposite side. Now, this little chunk of angle iron that I'm using is just for reference. We plan on using longer pieces for our reinforcements. Off camera, I removed all the bolts that hold this section in place, and now we can modify this part. And after this is finished, we'll modify the support braces. Okay, now that we cut our clearance slots for the CVT belt drive, I reckon we need to weld in some steel reinforcements for this part and make it just as strong as it was originally. For that, we'll use this chunk of angle iron. Now, this reinforcement part is actually painted gray and it's not galvanized. You never want to weld onto galvanized steel because it releases toxic gases. Alright, let's continue. Okay, well this is the first part that's done, and it's more than likely a lot stronger than before. Now of course it fits the cradle perfectly because our goal was not to change any of the mounting points, and the reason that's important is it took a long time to design this cradle when it was first built a few months ago, and there's absolutely no dimensional drawings on any of these parts. So it's a lot simpler if we modified stuff and not build something completely new, because building something new would take a bunch of time and a lot of material. Off camera, I went ahead and modified the part for the other side, so theoretically we now have plenty of clearance for the larger CVT clutch system, at least on the top side. Now down below I had to widen the support brackets, and to speed things up I did that off camera. Anyway, let's take a look down below. So as you can see, there's plenty of clearance around the belt, and if you don't think so, then it may be the camera angle, but I assure you we have plenty of clearance. Okay, well the hard part's done, and it looks like it's going to work just fine. Next we'll have to lengthen the input shaft on the transmission, and for that we'll need to take the cradle completely out of the car and disassemble it. It wasn't easy, but I managed to get the cradle out of the car. So let's take a moment and talk about clutches. I think most of the audience knows why we're using a CVT belt drive to connect the engine to the Renault transmission, and the main reason is the 670 Predator engine doesn't have thrust bearings, and it wasn't designed to take thrust loads. I've talked about this before, so I recommend that you watch my older videos if you want to learn more. Anyway, there's an older project on YouTube where a guy actually directly connected a 670 Predator engine to the flywheel and clutch of a Mazda Miata. And long story short, he had problems, lots of them. I think the engine's actually dead now and has a busted crankshaft. And that's too bad because I actually think this was a cool project, and I'll put a link to one of his videos in the description. So one of the things I noticed about the 670 powered Miata was the car was sluggish. And let's be realistic, you only put a 670cc engine in a Miata for fun and not for performance. The big difference between the Miata project and this Renault is we're using a CVT drive to simplify the connection between the engine and transmission. And since the CVT drive is a variable ratio, the Renault's not sluggish at all. It boogies when you floor it. Now, it ain't as fast as a 69 Chevelle with a 396 and an M21, but it can get out of its own way in a hurry. So yeah, I'm real happy with the way the CVT adds a bit of performance to this otherwise slow car. And probably the only mistake we made was not using a CVT that was rated for the power of the 670cc engine. Anyway, let's get back to working on the Renault. As you can see, we had to take apart the freshly rebuilt engine cradle, and hopefully we'll have it all back together again once we replace the input shaft to the transmission. So the entire rotating assembly was put together with red Loctite to prevent stuff from falling apart. You would be surprised how fast things loosen up from all the vibrations that are generated by the lawnmower engine, and Loctite seems to be the trick that keeps things together. Actually, it works too good, and the only way to take stuff apart is to heat it up with this torch. Well, perhaps we used too much Loctite. You see, we had to dump a lot of heat into these parts, and I think I ruined this bearing. Fortunately, we had a brand new bearing in stock. Yeah, I think this guy has had it, and I don't think it would last too long if we tried to reuse it. These bearings are surprisingly inexpensive. So this is the input shaft, and as you can see, we had to heat this guy up as well in order to get it out. I think this shaft is also ruined, but no big deal, we're going to be replacing it anyway. All of these parts have to fit together a certain way, and there's extremely tight tolerances. So when I took everything apart, I had to draw a cartoon of how everything goes back together. You know, I built all this stuff only a few months ago, but looking at it now, it's a complete mystery how I figured all this stuff out in the first place. Anyway, let's build a new input shaft. So this is the old shaft, and we need to make a longer version of this. On this side of the shaft, we need to counterbore it for a 12mm hole, and on the other side, we need to drill and tap it for a 5/16 bolt, which is about 8mm for those who are metric inclined. So this is the new shaft, and as you can see, it's quite a bit longer. I reckon we'll need to modify this on the lathe, and let's get going on that. So the first thing we need to do is counterbore the shaft with a 12mm hole. Now let's drill out the other side so we can thread it for a 5/16 fastener. Yeah, on projects like this, I mix and match metric and imperial fasteners. It's just the way it is. While the shaft is still in the lathe, I'm going to replace the drill bit with a tap. The idea is we can use the lathe to get the tap started in the shaft, and doing it this way avoids the tap being crooked when it starts threading into the shaft. Okay, cool. Now we can finish it off on the vise. Alright, well, let's use a little bit of oil to help cut the threads. I'll fast forward this because it takes a while going back and forth with the tool. Okay, so now we have a brand new input shaft, and I've already installed the shaft collar in the correct location. All we need to do now is install the shaft key. There we go. Now, since this counterbore part of the shaft is significantly weaker, we don't want any of the torque on this part of the shaft, so we're going to use a 3D printed key to fill in this area. Now, the purpose of this plastic key is to more or less keep the longer steel key in place. It's amazing how much these parts can actually move when they're locked down, and the plastic key should do the trick. About several episodes ago, we actually had the input shaft break along the area that was counterbored. And we used this plastic key trick in the repaired shaft. It seems to work pretty good. Now we need to coat everything in red Loctite, and that'll more or less guarantee that everything stays in place. In case you're wondering, this ain't my first rodeo, and the stuff that I do is from experience. In the past, we have broken quite a few things because parts somehow loosened up. And now we need to glue the set screw in place. Now, off camera, all of these parts were cleaned with brake parts cleaner, and that's to prevent any oil contamination. And that should do it. So off camera, I went ahead and pre-assembled this section of the transmission adapter. All of these parts have to be perfectly aligned, and it takes forever to do that. Actually, it's more like 4 hours. Anyway, let's mount this adapter up to the engine stand and finish assembling it. So at this point, I've already installed the shaft key, and now I can slip the driven pulley onto the input shaft. So normally I use nylock nuts on everything. However, as I loosely assemble this cradle, I'm temporarily using regular nuts. At some point, these nuts will be replaced with nylocks, but for now it makes assembling this contraption so much easier. Oh, so the belt on the left is the new drive belt, and as you can see, it's a lot thicker and should last a long time. So the trend I'm seeing is all the new Comet belts are coming from Italy. Now, I have nothing against Italy, but I wonder why these belts are now being imported. And now we can install the input shaft support bearing. Off camera, I had to drill new mounting holes for this bracket in order to accommodate everything being a lot longer. Yep, everything still spins fine. Now, this aluminum cap slides onto the input shaft and holds everything together. It's sized perfectly to clamp the whole assembly together with only a slight amount of pressure. This prevents any movement in the shaft and all the stuff connected to the shaft. Now, if you recall, we also have to move the engine up about an inch or 25 millimeter. And to do that, we're going to use these spacers. Of course, these spacers are less than the 25 millimeter that we need, but they only account for some of the distance we need to raise the engine. You see, the motor mount plate originally mounted underneath these rails, and if we move the plate on top, well, that gets us another 3/8 of an inch or 9.5 millimeter. So things are starting to add up. Let me zip these screws in place, and I'll show you my plan for raising the engine the rest of the way. So this is the shim that we fabricated in the previous episode, and it'll be just enough to get the engine at the correct height that Comet recommends for the drive belt. As you can see, mounting a lawnmower engine in a car does take a bit of engineering. Of course, everything you see is completely custom made, and we try to build stuff that lasts more than a few episodes. So let's slide this cradle under the engine and see how it all fits. Fast forward a bit and the engine mounting bolts are in place, and now we can finally mount the new Comet 94 Duster clutch. For this, I'm not going to be putting in the shaft key because this is only temporary. Well, let's see how hard it is to get the belt on. Yeah. Alright, the belt is on, and now we have a new and an improved drive system. So this video is less than 25 minutes, but in real life it took 2 weeks to get to this point. Now I did take a nap or two, but for the most part I worked my ass off to finish this modification. That's just the way it works in real life. As a matter of fact, the last part didn't arrive until a few minutes ago, and it's Friday. So that leaves me about 24 hours to edit and upload this video. Now I had hoped to have the car running and driving again in this video, but that just ain't gonna happen. I think we would need another Jimbo in order to do that. Anyway, we're close, and by the time you see this video, well, the car should be back on the road. So will this new clutch make the Renault faster? Well, according to the math, we should see a huge improvement. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on all your notifications, because in the next episode, I do believe we will have the fastest lawnmower-powered car in existence. Until next time.